When most people think about climate change, they picture melting ice caps or wildfires far away. But climate change is also happening here in Minnesota, in lakes many of us drive past every day, and it is harming something many students have never thought about: manumin, or wild rice, a plant that is central to Ojibwe culture, food, traditions, and community health. My research question for today is: how is climate change harming manumin and why does it matter? This question matters because manumin is not just a plant. It is a cultural relative, a teacher, and a source of identity for Ojibwe communities. According to the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, wild rice is a shallow water plant insensitive to changes in water levels. Sahan Journal reports that heavier rainfall is washing more sediment into lakes, making it harder for wild rice to grow. In the Rum River watershed, rainfall has been rising by about half an inch per decade since 1980. And in Little Fork River, it has increased by 2 inches per decade in the past 20 years. These trends show how quickly storm intensity is changing and how directly that change affects Manumin. For University of Minnesota students, my intended audience, this issue is local, urgent, and often invisible. Many students care about climate change, but they may not realize how deeply it affects Indigenous communities in our state. To understand why Manumin is at risk, it helps to know what it needs to survive. Wild rice best grows in shallow, cool water, usually between 0.5 and 3 feet deep, with steady water levels, clean sediment, and balanced nutrients. Climate change disrupts all of these conditions. Warmer summer raise lake temperatures, and stronger storms wash more sediment and pollution into the water. Together, these changes make it harder for wild rice to take root, grow, and reach the surface. And once Manumin disappears from a lake, it doesn't always return, even if the conditions improve later. For Ojibwe communities, these changes are personal. Manumin is part of their history, their ceremonies, and their identity. In a dissertation by Diana Peterson, elders expressed that the disappearance of wild rice was emblematic of a larger threat to their cultural identity and traditions. When climate change damages wild rice, it affects the ability to pass down teachings that have existed for hundreds of years. A disability-related perspective also helps us understand the stakes. As disability scholars argue, environmental harm often becomes a form of cultural and community harm. When traditional foods disappear, communities lose access to cultural nourishment, collective health, and practices that support well-being. For some elders with mobility limitations, harvesting Manumin is already physically challenging. Climate-driven habitat loss makes access even harder, creating new barriers to cultural participation. Climate change often feels like a distant problem. This is happening right here in Minnesota. It is happening in places many students have visited without knowing what is at stake. Climate justice starts with understanding what is happening in our own backyard and listening to Indigenous knowledge that has cared for these lakes for generations. Across scientific studies, Indigenous knowledge, and disability perspectives and environmental reports, one message is clear: climate change is harming Manumin, and protecting it is essential for cultural survival and justice. Science shows how rising temperatures, unstable water levels, and increased sedimentation threaten the conditions Manumin needs to survive, while Indigenous knowledge reveals that cultural loss that follows, emphasizing the responsibility of relational care. And disability perspectives highlight how environmental harm becomes community harm, especially for elders and those already facing barriers to access. And then finally, environmental journalism underscores the urgency of protecting wild rice habitats before these changes become irreversible. Together, these perspectives show that this issue is not only ecological, but it is also cultural, ethical, and deeply human. My goal is to help students see that their awareness and action can make a real difference. Protecting Manumin means respecting Indigenous rights, supporting cultural survival, and understanding climate change as a local issue, not just a global one.